Sara from Sara's. As you can see, I'm wearing my oy vey apron because this world is oy vey right now. It really is. I usually do my classes and I'm missing them, and I think some of you are too. So Friday nights, for a Jewish girl like me, we do challah, which is our Jewish braided egg bread. The braid is to symbolize coming together for the week, everybody coming together. Just us four in my family will come together because we're all waiting to be swabbed for the coronavirus. This challah will only be eaten by us, but next week I will start delivering them to those in need, I believe. So I'm going to teach you a little bit about my challah, and I will show you how to make it. Then we're going to go away, let it rise, and I'm going to show you how to braid it. So we have different kinds of yeast, of course. There's cake yeast, which I never use. There's quick rise yeast, and there's the traditional yeast. Well, we have a lot of time on our hands, so there's no reason to use the quick rise yeast, but I prefer this anyway. So the water, we need 2.5 cups of water, and I always say if you'd like to have a bath in it, that's the perfect temperature. Otherwise it's too cold or too hot. 2.5 cups of water. Put that in your mix master if you have one. The other thing you want to make sure is 1 tablespoon of sugar. Sugar feeds yeast. Don't put salt in, it will kill the yeast. The yeast is actually dead until we do this. Then we're going to put 1 nice tablespoon of the yeast in the water, and we're going to wait for the magic to happen. The reason I don't put the yeast in first is because it will go flying when we put the water on top of it. This way the yeast is sitting at the bottom. We'll get a close-up of that. And I always tell the kids when we're cooking, wait for the magic. It's boring, but wait. Soon it will just bubble up. I'll tell you some little tidbits while you're waiting for that to happen. People often ask me, should we use bread flour? Should we use all-purpose flour? What should we use? I, at work, always use all-purpose flour because that's what I have on hand. But today at home, because my husband's been making bread while he's been bored, we have bread flour. The difference between the bread flour and the all-purpose flour is the protein content. Bread flour has a higher protein content, about 11 to 13%, which is where we get the gluten and the chew in the bread. So bread flour is actually the better choice, but I've really found very little difference while making this challah. I almost always use all-purpose. The bread flour though works perfectly fine. So the protein is what gives us the chew, and the chew is from the gluten. So that's good. So this is starting to bubble. You'll see it starting to move on its own. It's starting to have its own little mind. Soon we'll see it, and it's gonna, I'll wait till it actually bubbles right from the bottom, which is quite an exciting thing to watch. So let's give it a second and we will see. So far all that's in there is 1 tablespoon of yeast, 1 tablespoon of sugar, and 2.5 cups of warm water. I said I wanted it at the temperature of a bath, but don't use your bath water. Use nice fresh water. Not a good idea to use any of our yucky water right now because we're all sick. This bread can only make us feel better. So we're just waiting for it to start bubbling, and when it bubbles, I'll tell my husband Peter, who's filming, to come close up, and you guys will see it start to have a little mind of its own from the bottom. If it doesn't bubble up, your yeast is gone. Your yeast is dead. Your yeast isn't going to make your bread work throughout the whole thing. That's why it's best to start with this. Here, the magic is happening, Peter. You can show it now nice and close. It comes from the bottom, it's going to bubble up, and it does that all by itself. And it usually takes 5 to 10 minutes. And soon when it bubbles, you'll have a whole bubbly top to it. And that's where it looks great. So there we go. It's bubbled from the bottom. Everything's ready to go now. So now we have the warm water with the yeast and the sugar. The sugar fed the yeast. Now it's nice and done. So this is my dough hook. Everybody's dough hook looks a little different. If you don't have one of these machines, that's okay. You can use your hand. It's just a lot more labor intensive. We don't want to have it on like I just did. Now, the other thing, oh, actually I'll lift this up. The other thing is we need 1/3 cup of oil. I'm putting the oil in here because then I'm going to put about 1/2 cup of honey. Now, if I put the honey on top of the oil, the honey doesn't stick to the bottom and the whole thing pours out nice and clean. See? So that, because honey can be a pain. Then now we can put 1 tablespoon of kosher salt, can be regular salt too, into the flour. Remember, we don't want it touching the yeast until the yeast has proofed. Now the yeast is proofed. So now we have 1/2 cup of honey, 1/3 of a cup of oil, 1 tablespoon of salt. Now we're going to do the eggs. So the eggs, for kosher reasons, and for all people I think, you want to crack it into a separate container. These are actually room temperature eggs. And we want to crack it into a separate container to make sure there is no blood spot in it. Now, they're kosher. To be kosher, you can't eat an egg with a blood spot in it. Now, the reason for that is a blood spot usually shows that a new embryo has started to form, and in kosher law, you can't eat an embryo, therefore we throw out the whole egg. So this is the first egg, no blood spot, perfect egg. We're going to put it in. Then it's an egg bread, so we want a second egg, also perfect, no blood spot. We'll put that in. Now we're going to start whipping it up, beating it up very slowly, and all of our ingredients are in there. In here, I have 8 cups of bread flour, and I have 1 tablespoon of salt. I'm just slowly going to start adding it to it. Now I may stop this because I don't want it to go flying. So this is 8 cups. We may not use the whole 8 cups. We may save some for rolling out. But you simply let it come together on its own. It will eventually pull away from the sides, and when it pulls away from the sides, then you know it's a perfect dough. So that was about half of the 8 cups of flour I put in. It's starting to come together, turning into dough. I'm going to turn it off. I'm going to lift it. I'm going to add the rest of this flour, most of it. I'm going to save myself a little bit for later. And now we're just going to let it beat for maybe 3 to 5 minutes. And we can just watch it beating there. And you'll see slowly it progresses into a dough all by itself. And if I need to add more water, I will. I shouldn't need to add anything else to this actually. Sometimes you think you do, and then you realize, no, it's going to be just perfect. You don't have to do a thing as it comes together. Now there's lots of different mix masters you can use. This one is 22 years old from when Peter and I got married. It still works like a charm. It's great. But as you can see, this is starting to come together. I'm going to turn this up. And now when it pulls away neatly from the sides, and the sides are completely clean, then you know it's been kneading enough, which is wonderful. You think it's never going to, and then it does. It comes completely away from the sides. It's actually beautiful already. I know that's not 3 to 5 minutes, but I will stop it for the purpose of this little video. It's come away from the sides just beautifully. Taking my dough hook off. I'm moving this away. Some flour did spill out because I'm a slob. I'm going to put the rest of the flour here. I'm going to take this off. There's my dough. It should leave, if you've done it properly, which you will, an almost completely clean bowl from your mix master. I'm simply going to give it a little bit of a nice knead. You'll see it's a little bit of a yellower dough than just a regular bread dough because of the extra egg in it. There we go. Lots of people say you have to spray the inside or oil the inside of the pot you're going to let it proof in. I never do. There's enough oil in this and it's done beautifully, so there's no reason to. So our dough is here. It's going to be ready to now proof. It's warm enough, and as I said, we have lots of time, so it doesn't really matter. I'm just going to cover it with a nice clean towel. I'll put it on top of my stove, which is, the oven is on, the range, so it's nice and warm. You can put it on top of the fridge, just somewhere nice and warm. I know my mother used to put it in the bathroom because that's where it was warmest, because that's where our heating vent was. I don't do that. So I'm going to cover this. I'll be back in about an hour, and then we will see how it's growing, and I'm going to show you how to do a 6 braid. And thanks to Marla from the Promotion Factory, I'm now going to have this with ginger ale. This is our dough. It rose beautifully, just like we thought. Now we're going to dump it out. Back onto that residual flour that I left here. This, like I said, I didn't oil the bowl. but it's perfectly fine. We're going to give it one more nice little knead on the counter. Now you can braid it just like hair, so you can do 3, but my favorite is the 6. So we're going to cut it in half, and then we'll cut it 3 times on each side. Now we're going to do that again. It's possibly my favorite thing to make. This dough is so good for cinnamon buns and pizza. It almost makes like a Greek style thick pizza because it rises so beautifully. Now we're just going to make these into nice long tubes, hopefully equal length, and doesn't matter that they're not 100% smooth because they will smooth out as we let them have a second rise. I've done it without a second rise before too. It works beautifully, but the more time you have to let it rise, just the better the dough is. You don't want to let it rise forever and ever, but another half an hour or so just to let it rest is very good. So we have 2 of our little ropes. We have our 3rd one. You can also make these into beautiful buns. You can make small challah buns, so small little braids. You can also, with the kids, I like to give the kids a piece of the dough and let them do it in whatever shape they want. So when I do a kids class, we've had to make them into Mickey Mouse, we've had to make them into bears. Kids sometimes are way more creative than we are, and they just have a really fun time doing it. And it's nice to do it with them when we're stuck at home like this. Dough is just one of the most fun things they can do. So they can do the dough without the mix master and just enjoy playing with the dough, and then they can make it into anything. You can let them put cinnamon sugar on it. If I was to roll out this dough nice and flat, very flat, like 1/4 of an inch maybe, in a rectangle, put lots of butter, some sugar, some cinnamon. You can even put butterscotch pudding on it, then roll it up and cut it out. It makes delicious cinnamon buns. The reason we don't use milk or butter in this is because for kosher law, most of the meals on a Friday night dinner, our Sabbath dinner, are often meat, and we don't mix milk with meat. That's why there's oil in it instead of milk. So lots of cinnamon roll recipes you'll see will have butter or milk in it. This one does not, but it still is a very good dough. So we have almost the same length, not quite. I'll probably take that one off and put a little bit there. Ideally, we're supposed to break a piece of this dough off, say a prayer, and throw it out, but I'm not doing that today. Okay, so we have our 6 ropes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, lots of people do it as a 3, which is just a simple braid, but we're gonna do this. Take this one over, and you're gonna take it over 2, and you're gonna put it under 1, and then over the next 2. Now we're gonna do that again. Take the end one on your right, over 2, under 1, over 2. Still have the 6. Over 2, 1, 2, under 1, and then over these 2. Again, take the end one. We're going to go over 2, under 1, over 2. I think we can get one more out of this. Over 2, under 1, over 2. We're going to take this, going to give it a good pinch and fold it under. We're going to turn this around. We're going to do the exact same thing. So we're going to go over 2, under 1, over 2. This one on the end, over the 2, under 1, over 2. One on the end, over 2, under 1, over 2. When it starts looking like it's going to be too hard, take it, give it a good pinch, throw it underneath. Now, this doesn't look perfection yet, but we're going to let it rise again for about another half an hour. We're going to cover it with that towel again. It's going to grow a little bit more. While we're going to crack another egg. Make sure there's no blood spots. We're going to put a touch of honey in it, just a touch. It makes it a little bit shiny, a little bit sweet, I usually do it more on our Jewish New Year on Rosh Hashanah, but it is nice now. We're just going to beat this up. You can do it with a fork, or you can do it with your pastry brush. It makes no difference. And when we come back, I will paint this beautiful challah with this egg mixture, and then we'll put it in the oven. We're going to bake it 375 on the lower rack. If you're doing convection, it can be 350 on the lower rack. You go down about 25 degrees. We'll bake it for about 35 minutes. And how you know if it's nice and ready is when we flick it. If it is hollow, then we know we've done a good job of baking it. I will take a break and come back in about half an hour when this is risen, and we will paint it and put it in the oven. So we've left it for a little while. The longer you leave it, the bigger it gets. But if you leave it too long, it becomes just one big blob. So we don't want to leave it too long. Here's my egg wash. The important thing with the egg wash is it will grow. So you want to get the egg wash in every little nook and cranny. Otherwise, it will be a lighter color. It won't be evenly browned. So try and get it everywhere. I have put this on parchment paper. You can also just grease your cookie sheet if you want, whichever you feel like doing. So just make sure, if you can, to get into every little nook and cranny of this. I have the oven preheating. And even if you think you get it in every nook and cranny, sometimes you don't, because it will grow so much in the oven. This is a beautiful, beautiful, really versatile dough, and it will keep growing in the oven. But I haven't found a challah dough I like better yet. But I'm willing to listen to comments and anybody's recipes. I'm happy to try. I've tried many. This is my favorite. Always comes out very good. So I'm just making sure it gets into all these little dry spots. And I will probably come back in and do that again just before I put it in the oven, just to make sure it's really nicely glazed with the egg and the honey. If you don't want to use the honey, you don't have to. When we were in the States last, we went to Trader Joe's. We bought the everything but the bagel sesame seasoning, which we love. So I'm going to put it on. So what that basically is poppy seeds, sesame seeds, and a little bit of garlic. And we're just putting that all over it. While the oven preheats, I will just keep making sure that it's all covered in my egg wash, and then we will come back and show it to you in about 35 minutes when it's completely baked and ready to eat. And here is the finished product, and you'll see what I mean by growing and me not being able to get the egg wash here, but mine just was too good and it grew too much. How you check that it's done, like I said, it'll tap. If it sounds hollow, it's perfect. Subscribe for more recipes from Sara's Kitchen.